I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Thursday, May the 25th, brought to you in part by Vitalix. Vitalix has multiple options for controlling and repelling the fly population in your herd. Get the blue tub, go to Vitalix.com. Why feed in the Southern Plains? I was talking with a friend of mine that feeds cattle. He's from the southeast, retains ownership, sends cattle to the Southern Plains to feed. He was very frustrated because the fat cattle that he's been feeding in the Southern Plains are selling at $11 or $12 discount to what the cattle are bringing in the Northern Plains. He's buying feed, he's buying corn plus freight from the Northern Plains down to the Southern Plains. And his cattle are about as good as what they're selling in the Northern Plains, and he's selling at $11 or $12 discount. It's frustrating for him. We can see it in the wintertime when they're feeding cattle in the wintertime, because the storms that they see in the Northern Plains, the mud that they're pulling, the mud and the cold weather that they're fighting up there. And we saw guys that fed cattle in the Northern Plains while the market was going up, and they weren't making as much as what they should have made. Normally, they're not always seeing profits, but there was profits to be seen this last year. But because of the mud and the storms that they were fading in the Northern Plains, they weren't getting that because the cattle were using most of their energy to stay warm. But in the summertime, this time of the year and going forward when it's warm, you know, why would you feed in the Southern Plains when you know that the guys can't sell the cattle? And if you're just feeding cattle for custom, and luckily there's not that many guys that are custom feeding cattle in the Southern Plains. Most everybody and a lot of corporate type feeders are feeding for the formula. Not very many custom cattle feeders in the Southern Plains. But what do they have to offer? They can't sell their fat cattle because so many people in the Southern Plains are formulated, and they don't need that many cattle bought on the open market in the Southern Plains. It's frustrating for people that send cattle to the Southern Plains to feed cattle, selling them on the open market to compete when they could send them north. And I was talking to the guy, and he was down the Southern Plains and said, well, I'm sending some plain cattle out there. They feed plain cattle in the Northern Plains. They feed Southern type cattle in the Northern Plains, especially in the summertime of the year, and they can get them gone. They might be at $2 or $3 back, but they're not $12 back. And it's just getting to the point where if you're feeding cattle, custom cattle feeding in the Southern Plains, why would you want to do it? When they can't sell the cattle, you're that many dollars back, and it's very frustrating. But it doesn't make a lot of sense, and of course that's why everybody's feeding on the formulated side and sending them in, and that's why we don't see much trade in the Southern Plains, because everybody is formulated. But up in the Northern Plains, up in Nebraska and Iowa, they sell cattle negotiated. They get the market for the cattle, and it's much more profitable in the Northern Plains, and I can't see why anybody that's feeding cattle, custom cattle feeding, going to sell them in the negotiated market, why they wouldn't send them north. And that's what's happening, and I hate it for the Southern Plains. I live in the Southern Plains. Used to be a lot of Southern Plains custom cattle feeders. There's not that many anymore. But you can see why people that are feeding cattle custom don't want to send them to the Southern Plains anymore, and I feel like that's going to go continuously more that way as we go forward. Coming to you from Powell, Wyoming, going to speak at the Wyoming Ag Bankers Association meeting there in Powell, Wyoming on Thursday. Looking forward to that. Met a lot of good guys there. Mike and Marvin, the guys that I met there, are good guys there, and had a lot of fun with them at the evening meal that we had on Wednesday night in Powell, Wyoming. But talk about the board. On Wednesday, June live cattle futures were up $1.85. That is stealing basis from you guys at 166.10. August live cattle up $1.55 at 164.12. Your back months on live cattle up 60 cents to up $1.20. May feeder cattle, they're just trying to get with the index levels, and they're chasing them down because the feeder cattle have been so much higher this week, but up $1.17 at 208.97. August up $1.05 at 234.52. Your back months on feeder cattle were all higher, up 87 cents to up 217 for the farthest month out. Talk about your grains. December new crop corn up 3 1/4 cent at 5.20. November new crop beans down 2 3/4 cent at 11.85. Kansas City July wheat very volatile, down 29 1/4 cent at 8.12 1/4. Fat cattle trade developed in the 5-area feeding region on Wednesday. Iowa sold 6,000 head from $1.80 to $1.83, and that's higher. It's quite a bit higher there. And your dress sales from $2.83 to $2.85. Nebraska 10,300 head sold from $179 to $183, and your packers just kept raising bids because they're hungry for cattle. They're desperate for cattle. They're hand to mouth. No blood on the floor. They need the cattle. Dress sales in Nebraska from $280 to $286.50 direct in the 5-area feeding region in the Northern Plains. Kansas sold 9,700 head from $170 to $174. What was that $174 on? It was mostly $171, and that is $1 higher. But the $174 was on Fed Cattle Exchange on some beef on dairy cattle. The $170, I'm not sure what that was, but some cattle that they were desperately needing to get rid of, but it was mostly at $171. Fed Cattle Exchange sold some commodity cattle at $171.50 with competitive bidding from packers, regional packers, and some of your big major packers bidding on the Fed Cattle Exchange. Why people don't choose to sell cattle in the Southern Plains in a competitive manner, I don't know. Texas sold 6,000 head from $170 to $171.50, and like I said, the $171.50 was on the Fed Cattle Exchange. It was mostly all $171. Box beef cutout values were mixed. Choice cuts down $244 at $298.30. Selects up $251 at $283.79. Slaughter running at a good pace, 377,000 through the first 3 days of the week. That was down 2,000 from the big week last week, up 2,000 from the same week a year ago. Talk about what else is going on. Livestock Risk Services, that's Dakota Moss. They are the LRP specialists. He offices in the Exchange Building, the Oklahoma National Stockyards in Oklahoma City. He's got all these agents there that work with him that are listed here. If you guys are turning cattle out here, commodity type cattle especially, turning cattle out, you've got to get an LRP on them, guys. You've got to hedge them in some way, shape, or matter, and call them at Livestock Risk Services to see how they can help you. Let's talk about your feeder cattle market, your real-time index on DV auction. Late in the day on Wednesday, based on your 800-pound steer, up through the 12 states, and at 800-pound on the average auction cash steer at $211.15. That's up 89 cents, far above your CME cash feeder cattle index that's always lagging behind. Talk about some big sales coming up here on Thursday. Western Video Market. Of course, I talked about the big sale that they had last time. They've got another big video market sale coming up here on Thursday. Go to wvmcattle.com or go on to DV Auction, and you can pipe into that Western Video Market sale. Starts at 11 o'clock Central. See 9 o'clock out west there where they start the sale. Going to be in Cottonwood, California. But they've got a lot of good cattle on there, got a lot of replacement cattle on there, a lot of pairs on there if you're interested in those. Get approved, bid on DV Auction at Western Video Market sale there. Talk about your big sales on Wednesday. OKC West, El Reno, Oklahoma, 9,300 head for the 2-day sale, and it was mostly feeder cattle on Wednesday, 7,500 or more. Feeders sold $2 to $6 higher. Calves sold sharply higher on Tuesday. They've had moisture in that area, and that's got everybody excited. And OKC West and El Reno was your national beef wire stick out sale of the day. You look at this video, or it's your market report from the El Reno sale there on Cattle Market Central. Look at your best tested weights. 523 head of 6-weight steers in El Reno, averaged 656 at 217.81. 592 head of 7-weight steers, averaged 762 at 206.09. And 1,107 head of 8-weight steers in El Reno, Oklahoma. They averaged 834 pounds with a weighted average price of $200.67. 906 head of 9-weight steers averaged 940 at 189.34. Look at the heifers. We had 1,086 head of 6-weight heifers in El Reno. They averaged 653 with a weighted average price of $212.43. This is the market in the Southern Plains, guys. 1,000 head of 7-weight heifers averaged 752, weighted average price $194.26, and 867 head of 8-weight heifers in El Reno averaged 841, weighted average price $182.49. Give you some stick out sales from all around. How about South Central Regional Stockyards? Vienna, Missouri, they get the really top quality calves and feeder cattle this time of year when nobody else has them. How about 61 head of 602-pound steers, bring $266, Vienna, Missouri. Bloomfield Livestock Market, Bloomfield, Iowa. That's the Schooley family. They sold 64 steers, weighed 883 at 217. But the most impressive quote that I saw anywhere on Wednesday in your Macrocin No BS top quote for the day was Stockman's Livestock Market, the feeder cattle sale in Yankton, South Dakota. 129 steers weighed 823 at 237.75. And that's your feeder flash for Thursday.